good morning. It's a fantasy basketball podcast, episode number 4, talking centers today. I'm your host, Ken Kelly. With me, as always, Big Game James.
Ahoy.
Ahoy, James. And how are we this fine college football Saturday morning?
I'm good. Saturday mornings are my favorite. I feel like I'm most productive on a Saturday morning. I don't know why.
You're most productive, like around the house?
Just in general, I have more energy on Saturday morning. I think it like transcends from my childhood. Saturday mornings where you get up, big bowl of sugary cereal, give me some type 2 diabetes, and watch my cartoons, and that has almost not changed to this day.
You get up and have Frankenberry and watch like NBA All-Star rerun cartoon, or like what do?
Things like that. As a matter of fact, I was watching. I've watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles like the last 2 weekends, and then I was trying to find. I forgot what the name of the show was, but it was the cartoon that had Bo Jackson, Wayne Gretzky, and Michael Jordan. Remember that one?
And that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, it was like the All Pros or something like that.
Yeah.
That was a cool show. Super.
You
cool
can
show.
find episodes on YouTube. Thank God for YouTube. I mean, you could find almost anything on there. So
Yeah, you can, for better or worse.
I ended up going down the rabbit hole first thing this morning, though, and watching videos on squatters. It is unbelievable to me, some of these things you'll find on the internet on people just walking into a house, like a rental, and refusing to leave, and some of the things that it takes to get them out of it. I know it has nothing to do with basketball, but if you find yourself at a loss or a void of topics to look up on YouTube, I challenge you to watch one video of squatters without that consuming the rest of your day. Like as soon as we're done, I'm going to be going back to watching videos on squatters.
I think it's funny though, I mean the squatters thing. Yeah, it is really fascinating for sure. That's a whole like underground world of people. But I find it funny that you're saying that you're most productive on a Saturday, and that includes just watching videos on YouTube of squatters and eating cereal. That doesn't seem productive to me. That seems entertaining.
I'll do dishes while I'm doing that. Sometimes I'll vacuum if I'm watching shows. I can have my phone with me. I'm a simultaneous guy. I don't like to do just one thing at a time. So that's what I mean by productive. So I constantly have something going on in the background, even if it's ambient. I can't do no noise whatsoever or no stimulus unless I'm asleep, and then it's just got to be blackout.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of sleep, I told you yesterday that I was trying a CPAP machine for the first time. I've been having some sleeping problems. I could not fall asleep last night. So, I'd already, I knew that I was going to have a hard time with it on the first night. So I had a couple of IPAs at dinner and thought, okay, now I'll just kind of sleep like a baby. And I couldn't do it. So then about midnight, I took a Benadryl. So the IPA with the Benadryl chaser, it turned out to be like a hallucinogen. So I did fall asleep around 1 o'clock, but I had a dream last night that Adam Rank from Fantasy Football Now on the NFL Network was on Survivor with me. And he had befriended me, but then he turned out to be the celebrity cook and he stole my shoes. Which is weird. It's very weird because I've been in leagues with Adam before and drafts, and he's a super nice guy, kind of off the air, and I don't know what that means, but yeah, I woke up today and I don't know if I'm refreshed or in a weird malaise. I don't know. It's a very weird feeling today. So if at some point you see my head hit the desk or see me like pee my pants and start running around, there is a reason for that, and that's a very weird combination of things that I somehow thought was a good idea to put in my body. So I followed it up this morning with, you're talking about sugary cereal. I have my Luau barbecue chips and Dr. Pepper this morning. So I think I should be ready to go.
Oh, you're going to be on one today.
I feel good. I feel good about it.
Let's kick it off. Let's talk about some centers, the dying breed of the NBA.
They are the dying breed. It's funny. You watch The Last Dance, and there's a clip out there with Mark Eaton, who, if you don't know who Mark Eaton was, he was a center for Utah. He was about 9 feet tall. And he was talking about how there's no way a guy who is 6'6", a guy being Michael Jordan, could ever dominate the league. The league has changed, and big men are so different now. The old back to the basket Shaquille O'Neal player just doesn't exist like it used to. And it's obviously the game has been revolutionized, but there is some tremendous value, especially at the top here with a lot of these centers. So we're going to cover this today. We covered the other positions in previous episodes, so go back and take a listen if you want to hear about those. We took our rankings along with those from Fantasy Pros and Yahoo and put them all together into the mixer and came up with some consensus. So we're going to talk about those today. First, we have some breaking news. Pretty interesting, and it's ironic because it affects the show today, and that's Robert Williams III. So it looks like he's going to be out. I'm seeing 8 to 12 weeks, which is significant, both in reality for Boston, who, side note, terrible week for the Celtics. Just an awful, awful week for Boston. But this is going to affect their team and also affect things from a fantasy perspective as well. So what are your thoughts on the Williams injury and news?
So we had him in our consensus ranking as 10th for centers. So this is a huge blow. Eastern Conference champions last year. There was a lot of momentum for them to repeat going into this season. A year of growth. And Williams played through his injury, so the hope is that he was going to have the offseason to kind of get right, have everybody lockstep, for the season to start, and it's just been one thing after another. They shored up some of their bench issues that they had last year and concerns that they had by getting Danilo Gallinari. He tears his ACL, and he's out. They bring in Malcolm Brogdon, which, fingers crossed that ends up being an experiment that works well. They are going to need them because they're going to have to go smaller with the Williams injury, so this is going to be one of those tests for Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum to try to keep the team afloat because, we talked extensively in the last episode about Ime Udoka's suspension. None of that means anything to me because they kind of lost me when I came to the realization that his fiance was Nia Long, and that is just an absolutely unacceptable transgression on his part. So he should have been let go.
I still can't believe you're still this is cut you deeply. I feel like we should have a whole episode on Nia Long and your feelings about what has happened here, because and granted there is more news that's going to come out, and I think it's going to just probably put you over the edge. We may not even make it to episode 5.
Well, I mean, my thing is everybody when they were young had a hierarchy, so their top 10, and whether you're a male or a female, everybody has a top 10. So I mean, let's not say we, it's not a sex-based thing, but Nia Long was in the consensus top 5 for the longest time. When she was on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, I mean, good Lord. It was, I said in the last episode, it was her and Kelly Kapowski, a.k.a. Tiffany Amber Thiessen, that just were battling for 1 and 2 all the time. It's like Jokic and Doncic. So anyway, as far as fantasy is concerned, you lose your head coach. He was a player's coach, and he rubbed them raw when he needed to. I think that he's part of the reason, a big reason why they got to the Eastern Conference Finals last year. He brings a winning kind of mindset that he got from that Popovich farm system. So you can't just easily replace that. Oh, and by the way, your starting center is going to be out for the foreseeable future because God forbid this ends up being nagging. Oh, and by the way, and that bench help that we thought we were going to have with Gallinari, he's out with a torn ACL. He's probably done for the entire season. So it went from being really, really, really good and Boston looking like, hey, all we did was get better, to now we got to make sure we're staying afloat because the Eastern Conference is just going to be a juggernaut this year.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's going to be a crazy kind of Wild West type of situation in the East. It's no easy path for anybody, for sure. Another little bit of news that came by today on the ticker, CJ McCollum has signed an extension with New Orleans. Certainly he was a great fit. There was a lot of talk about how happy he was to be there. That's going to put him there for the next 4 seasons. So what are your thoughts on the extension for CJ in New Orleans?
The extension for CJ, this extension for Zion, and they're going to take care of Brandon Ingram. We're going to talk about Jonas Valanciunas here in a little bit. I think he's going to be a key piece for them. New Orleans is really set to be a problem in the Western Conference for the next 4 seasons. So I think this is their way of saying, hey, we're no longer looking to sit on the sidelines. We're looking to make a dent. That playoff run last year opened a lot of eyes. I think they really pushed Phoenix to their limit, who was the best regular season team. And I think they're just going to be a year together and then kind of implementing a physical freak like Zion into it. it may not translate into, something this season. But I think if you're looking at a 4-year window, this is a pretty good run and an opportunity that New Orleans has.
It's funny, when that news came out this morning, I immediately went and checked some of the betting odds. So right now, as it sits, the Celtics are going to move down because of everything that's transpired this week. The Bucks are at plus 650, the Nets at plus 700, Clippers and Warriors at plus 700. Take a guess at what the New Orleans Pelicans are in terms of odds to win the NBA championship next year.
Plus 1120.
Plus 5,000 on FanDuel this morning. So that, to me, and granted, like, do I think they're going to win the championship this season? No. But if I have an extra 50 or $100 and I'm looking to make some type of a home run bet, that's not a bad one, because you look at what they have with McCollum and Ingram, and if there is a healthy Zion, that's a tough out, a really tough out in the playoffs. I really like their team. I like what they're doing there for sure. So let's go ahead and get into the centers now. I will say this much: when you look across the landscape here, there are some haves and have-nots here. I think that this is very similar to almost like the tight end position in football, where you have an elite 3 or 4, then you have a bunch of other guys who are kind of in the same big tier. But I'll say this: if you go to an in-person draft, the first thing that I would do is, if I didn't know the guys around, I would go and ask them who some of these centers were and who they liked a little bit. And if they can't pronounce their names, then you're going to be the shark in the water, because there are a lot of foreign players on this list. So, if you look at it, like if I was to have my son come down here and say, okay, who's number 15? Jacob Poeltl. No, Henry. Jakob Poeltl. And that's where we start. Okay, so Jakob Poeltl really had himself a great season last year. He's made some steady improvements. It's been interesting with him because he was highly regarded, obviously, when he came out of the league or out of college, and played his college ball at Utah and was drafted by the Raptors, first round, I believe, pick number 9 back in 2016. Just never really fit in there. They could never really find a spot for him. And of course he played behind another player we're going to talk about a little bit later on today, but it just didn't work out. He ended up being shipped to San Antonio. His minutes have steadily increased. Last year was a banner year for him. Minutes got all the way up to 29 per game, and his points per game went to 13.5. He's a good rebounder, 9.3 rebounds per game. He'll get you some assists too, which is nice, about 3 assists per game. So he's one of those players who, while he's not in the upper tier, upper echelon of great NBA centers, he's a quiet producer, and on a Spurs team that doesn't have a star-studded cast, I think he's going to be a really good selection if you miss out on some of these top-tier centers, especially with DeJounte Murray gone. The Spurs are going to need scoring. They're going to need Poeltl to be a pretty important part of their offense moving forward. So I really like him here. I think that 15 is about right, but it wouldn't surprise me to see him make the top 12 by the end of the season.
Yeah, and by 15, when you're talking centers, the priority just isn't centers in today's game. So from a fantasy perspective, a guy like Poeltl, you could pick up pretty late in drafts. From a fantasy standpoint, what you get in value for him are the double-double attributes. So 13.5 points last year. He's getting 9.3 rebounds. I do anticipate those going up. DeJounte Murray was a great rebounder. He's a fantastic field goal shooter. So he's one of those guys where he took 10 shots. They've progressively gone up the last three seasons. So he went from 4 field goals to 6.2 to 9.8. I would anticipate those going up again this season. So if he becomes a focal point of the offense, then those double-double opportunities, they increase. Great shooting percentage. He's a horrible free throw shooter. So I don't anticipate them being in close games where you're going to see Jakob Poeltl or anything like that. So you can live with it. Again, he's ranked 15th. As far as the season goes, you're probably not going to start looking at a guy like him until you're in that 7th round. So there's value there. A lot of people leave him on the wire because of the lack of name recognition. But keep in mind, San Antonio is going to be at a race to the bottom. They're not going to want to put a unit on that floor that's looking to win games. And they've got a couple young guys on their squad that it's going to be very difficult for Greg Popovich, who instills leadership in a winning culture, to say, hey, we need to kind of pull the reins back and understand that there's a bigger picture here for this upcoming season. So Keldon Johnson and Jeremy Sohan and Devin Vassell, those are guys that I don't think they're going to be cut out for being on a rebuild like time frame for much longer than one season. So Poeltl should still get plenty of run. I think he easily, meets his fantasy value from last season. I actually see that going up in some categories. So if he's there, if someone's afraid to take him, grab him.
I think you actually just invented a saying too. So instead of Hackapurtle, I'm thinking it's Hurtapurtle. Hurtapurtle would be a pretty good coaching
Trademark
strategy. That. Yeah, I think we should. Hurtapurtle is pretty good. So, all right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, James. Let's go ahead and have you start there. I know that this is a player who we are intimately familiar with.
So with number 14, we're going to go with Yusuf Nurkic of the Portland Trailblazers. This is a guy that I have a love-hate relationship just being a Portland Trailblazer fan. But from a productivity standpoint, I think part of the reason why there's frustration is his productivity when we need it, when it actually matters, take out outside of the fantasy realm and the real life realm. He tends to kind of come up short. Last season, 54% from the field, 27% from three. Really just drives me nuts when he puts that up. 69% from the free throw line, 15 points, 11.1 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.1 steals, just over half a block. Nurkic is a guy who's going to get you a double-double. So if you're in a multiplayer league, you definitely want as many of those people on your roster as possible, just because you're getting free points in that instance. So he more or less walks into double-doubles. It offsets his three-point shooting percentage, which most leagues, you're not going to get that huge of a detriment if his overall field goal percentage is 54%. So definitely has fantasy value. He's more of I'm more of a fan of him from a fantasy perspective than I am in real life. So if he's sitting around and somebody chooses not to take him, I think there's going to be incentive in Portland. Yusuf Nurkic is still with the Portland Trailblazers because of his relationship with Damian Lillard. He is a trade piece that could have and should have probably been moved a couple times already. I think he has a loyalty to Dame, and I think that he wants to get him where Dame wants to go, which is ultimately back to that Western Conference Championship or Western Conference Finals. So look for him to have a big year. As long as he stays healthy, he's definitely going to produce. If he's a healthy Nurkic, he'll produce in the top 10 for the centers. I just, his health is part of the reason why he's at 14 for me.
Well, that's a huge factor for him, and it really has been over the last 4 or so years. So you look at just the last 3 seasons in terms of games played, 8, 37, 56. Yes, a steady increase, but if you're banking on 56 games, it's not great. So you look at his numbers, and he is very consistent. Last year, 15 points a game, had a career high in rebounds, 11.1. That's solid. So I think that, much like you said, he does walk into double-doubles every time he hits the floor. There are just questions about his durability. So his free throw shooting is also subpar. His field goal percentage is going to be fine, but you look at he's never going to get you very many threes, maybe 0.3 per game. So he's going to get you probably 14, 15 points, 11 rebounds, not much else. He turns the ball over a little bit more than you'd like to see from other centers, but he's just one of those second-tier guys who you could get and fill out a roster and feel okay about it. Let's go ahead and move on to number 13 on our list, Jonas Valanciunas, or as your draft guy might say, Jonas Valanciunas. So I really like Valanciunas. I think that he is a nice fit in New Orleans. I really like his game. I think that moving forward, he's not asked to do a lot, and he's probably, from a fantasy perspective, he's almost a victim of circumstance because New Orleans does have so many mouths to feed, but he has been frighteningly consistent. So you look at his point per game total, and it's just one you can just kind of pencil in. So last year, right around 18 points a game, 11 rebounds per game, played about 30 minutes a night, and played in 74 games. So he has been historically pretty durable. There have been a couple of seasons there. The 2018-19 season, I think he played somewhere close to 50 games. But outside of that, he's been a very durable player. He's still only 30 years old. It seems like he's like 35, 36 years old at this point, but he's not. A very solid, very productive player. I think that as you move forward, again, these guys in this range between 8 and 15, if you just miss out on one of those elite level players and get one of these guys, you're going to be just fine. I think that he's a kind of a later round type of player, but somebody who I would definitely want to have on my roster. How about you?
Yeah, I'm actually going to lean into Jonas, and there's a chance that I'd be the guy who takes him a little bit higher than others. I'm looking at a stat line here, and I'm struggling to see how he wasn't a Western Conference All-Star, to be honest with you. I mean, just under 18 points. He's giving you 11.5 rebounds, 2.6 assists. He's shooting 54% from the field. From three, he's shooting 36%, and from the free throw line, he's shooting 82%. Like, those are all – and he played 74 games. I mean, these are things where if you are looking at the aggregate value of a center who gives you steady production, look, the introduction of Zion, it might affect his field goal attempts just a little bit. But keep in mind that it's important that he's on the floor when Zion's on the floor, because he'll be the guy who's defending the opposing team's center, because that just isn't Zion's strength. So you also need that guy to make sure that Zion doesn't get the physical abuse that they're going to be afraid of. There's some apprehension, from his injury history. Valanciunas is not that guy to play with. You know what I'm saying? He's got a Steven Adams value. I think there's a lot of similarities between those two players. But Valanciunas is money. And if he's sitting there, I'm absolutely grabbing him. And the more I think about it, there's an argument to have him move up this list. So again, keep in mind, this is a consensus between Ken and myself, Yahoo ADP, Fantasy Pros. But I definitely see more value in Valanciunas than some of the others. So let's move on to our next pick, and that is going to be Miles Turner of the Indiana Pacers. So Miles Turner, every year, same story. Guy just goes out and produces. He's always the talk of trades. He's been linked to multiple teams over the last few years. A couple of them that I wish that he would have gone to personally. The Lakers most recently. Last year had just under 13 points a game, 7 rebounds, an assist, field goal percentages over 50%, 3-point shooting 33%, free throw shooting 75%. So this is a guy who's been pretty consistent over the last 5 seasons, plays in quite a few games. Injuries and sitting in Indiana, there's a difference there. Load management injuries are ones that always need to be brought into question. And I think there was a little bit of that with Indiana over the last couple seasons. So from an actual health perspective, he's usually pretty durable. This season, the question is going to be whether or not Indianapolis is going to join that group, like Houston, who's some other, San Antonio, in the race for the bottom for the number 1 pick. If that's the case, I would look for them to finally get off of Turner's contract. But I do think it's one of those things where, you bring in a guy like Halliburton in that trade from Sacramento. He's a guy who is a willing passer, get people easy buckets, easy opportunities. And I think somebody like Turner could really thrive with that type of point guard. He hasn't had that. So I would like to see the experiment continue for 1 season with Indiana, a full season with Halliburton. Buddy Hield, maybe he's the one who's expendable. But I think Turner could have a good fit. Statistically speaking, if he leaves Indiana, his stats are probably going to drop, just because anybody who really wanted him, who saw him as a viable fit for heavy minutes, 30-plus minutes a game, they would have already made a move for him. So if he leaves and he goes to L.A., for instance, he might be there to help AD and kind of cushion him, but you're talking 24 to 26 minutes, which you instantly see some of his fantasy value diminish. So keep in mind that this ranking is really predicated on him staying in Indiana. What about you, Ken?
Yeah, I'm with you there. You know what Turner is to me? He's vanilla ice cream. He really is. He's like one of those guys who, he's just kind of average across the board. So if somebody offers you vanilla ice cream, you're not going to say no. I mean, you're gonna eat it, but you're not going to necessarily be as happy as you would with Rocky Road or mint chocolate chip or something else. He's just kind of there. So when you look at the numbers, I have a system that I use, and I have color coded systems where if you're average, you're basically in this white zone, in this range. There is nothing that Turner does that is elite. There's nothing that he does that's terrible. He is what he is. And I think that there's some positives to that for sure. You kind of know what you're going to get. Field goal percentage, going to be average, right around 48, 49. Free throw percentage for a center, not bad, but definitely not elite, somewhere around 75, 76, 77%. He'll make a three or two a game, which is fine, but it's not going to be a huge difference maker. So he's going to score 14 points, going to get you 8 rebounds, not much else. But, again, there is this kind of enigmatic part of having Turner on a fantasy roster, because if he was to be moved someplace else, his numbers could go up. So he's an interesting player for sure to have. I think that his value is probably more in a keeper league now. But
Do you think his value goes up if he gets moved? What would be a scenario that he would get moved to where his production actually increases?
Well, you could go down a ton of different rosters and whatnot, but if he gets dumped to kind of a bottom feeding team that doesn't have a lot of talent around him, I think those numbers could go up. I don't think there's any question. So I do think that there is also risk, though, and you bring up that question. I mean, there's risk involved here too the other way. So if Turner was moved to the Lakers, for instance, I don't think he has a chance to replicate these numbers, not with Anthony Davis and LeBron and Westbrook and the rest of the crew there. So if the Lakers somehow were to make some type of a deal to get Turner and or Buddy Hield from Indiana, which I don't know how they possibly could without sending Westbrook somewhere to have somebody eat his contract, I don't think his numbers would go up there either. I think that there are questions around Turner because of all these players on this list, his situation is probably the most volatile. You just don't know what's going to happen because he just may very well not fit Indiana's window. So we'll see what happens with him. I think that there are certainly worse paths that you could go. But again, I think that this is just one of those players who we've likely seen what his upside is, but his floor is also pretty high. Let's talk about upside, though, and move forward here to the player we have ranked at number 11th. He'd actually move up to number 10 now with Robert Williams moving down our list, and that's going to be Evan Mobley. Mobley is a player who, and I cannot believe that I'm actually saying this, but Cleveland is exciting again. Like this is the most exciting.
Okay. You scared me for a second because when you said, I can't believe I'm going to say this, I thought you were going to jump on the bandwagon that this is Tim Duncan 2.0, and I was going to have to shut it down.
Oh no. This is Tim Duncan minus 2.0. Like Mobley has no chance of being a Duncan-like player, but I do think that there is some productivity in him, and I think that he's going to take another good step forward. I don't see him with the talent to be an all NBA level player, but I think that he's going to be a very good Robin, if you will. Donovan Mitchell is going to be the Batman of that team. Okay. And I think he has really two Robins with Garland and Mobley.
He's the Harvey Dent.
No, he's not.
Yes,
Harvey Dent.
He
No,
is
he's
totally
not.
Harvey. He's Two-Face. Yes, he is.
Why do you think he's Two-Face?
Donovan Mitchell? Donovan Mitchell is going to have games where he's super, super excited that he's in Cleveland and things are going well. And then when things aren't going well, he's going to make sure that hints are dropped that he thought he was going to New York and that he really thought he was going to New York, and he's just kind of acclimating. It's going to take some time to get his bearings. And then when things go well, everything's going to be going great. And then if things fall off, then it's going to be like, well, it just takes some getting used to because I thought I was going to New York. So he's definitely Harvey Dent.
So you're saying then, if you were
and Kevin Love is the Penguin for sure.
Well, that's a whole nother story at this point. But are you saying that if you draft Donovan Mitchell, you're not just going to get egg on your face, you're going to get acid on your face if you draft Donovan Mitchell because you don't think he's going to be happy?
Yeah, that is figuratively what I'm saying.
Wow. I don't think so. I think that winning cures a lot. And I think with Mitchell, Mobley, and Garland, Cleveland's going to be a team that can be as competitive without LeBron as they've been since the Mark Price, Larry Nance Sr., Brad Daugherty, Ron Harper, Craig Elo days with Mike Fratello.
That doesn't mean. But that doesn't mean they're competitive. Do you see what I'm saying? Like they're going to be a fun team. They're going to be a fun team, but that's just a lot to put on a guy who I think Donovan Mitchell strikes me as one of those guys who's going to have a real hard time being known as a guy with no ring. Like you have Charles Barkley, who's fine being a guy who played hard, had a great career, no ring. I think it's going to be obnoxious later in Mitchell's career. I mean, he just oozes that I'm going to hop to where I feel like my best chance to get a ring is. I've never had a sense of loyalty when I'm around, not around, but anything that he's ever said, any interview he's ever done, there's nothing about it that led me to believe that he's in anything 100% unless there's an opportunity for him to win. And as much as I think Cleveland's going to be a fun story, I just don't think that they're going to be Eastern Conference contenders anytime soon. The makeup just isn't set up for that.
Okay, so Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Isaac Okoro, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen. That's your starting five. You've got the Penguin coming off the bench. Okay, you've got the Riddler and Karis LeVert. All right. You don't think that's a team that's going to be somewhere in the mix in the middle of the Eastern Conference, like a 3, 4, 5 seed?
No, I mean I see a 4 or 5 seed maybe, but they're not in the mix in the Eastern Conference. And I tell you where their strengths going to come from. And I like Garland a lot. But that team was humming on all cylinders when oh my gosh, why am I blanking?
Cedi Osman, Robin Lopez, Dean Wade,
No.
Raul
The
Neto,
the point guard.
Colin Sexton.
No. Flashy from Spain.
Flashy from Spain.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can see his face. Played for Minnesota for the longest time.
Varejao.
No. Oh, I'm gonna have to cut this out.
Ricky Rubio.
God, I literally
You're not
had a
cutting
stroke
it
on
out.
air.
That's fun.
I had a stroke on air. No, Ricky Rubio. So they were last season before Ricky got hurt. Their most productive lineup had Ricky Rubio out there because he was a facilitating guard who got easy baskets for Jared Allen. Look, Garland can create his own shot. He gets flustered when that double team comes. Mitchell definitely alleviates some of that, but neither one of them have that set at the offense selflessness mentality to put them in an actual situation where they're fighting for the Eastern Conference Championship. So there's going to have to be a concession on one of those two because we know Rubio's minutes are going to get curbed unless they're fighting for like a playoff game. And you know how this is as a coach. There are guys that are your starters, and then there are guys who you want on the floor in the last 5 minutes. You mark my words, they're going to have a hard time in Cleveland because Rubio, you're going to be hard-pressed to pull Rubio the last 5 minutes of games that mean something in Cleveland. So they're going to have to address that. You're not really getting a ton of offensive production from Mobley or Jared Allen, but they're both fantastic defensive players. So if your entire offense is going to be predicated on wings, high-volume wings, that doesn't win. Coming out of the Eastern Conference, which is a juggernaut, you're not getting past Milwaukee. You're not getting past Boston. You're not getting past Philly. I mean, you could neutralize a backcourt-heavy offense. So they are a fun story, but, I mean, a 5 seed, great. What does that mean? I mean, I guess hang a banner? I mean, that's almost like Sacramento. You know they're going to hang a banner if they get into the play-in game and they win. They're going to pull a Patrick Beverley celebration in the streets of Sacramento. So I'm not jumping on the Cleveland hype train just yet.
Well, I'm not saying that they're going to be an NBA championship contender, but I do think that they're good enough to be very competitive, and I think that bodes well for somebody like Mobley who is going to stay engaged and stay on the court. There's no reason to do any semblance of load management or anything with this crew. I think that they are in a good spot to be competitive, and I actually think that it's better from a fantasy perspective that they're not one of the top 2 or 3 seeds, because I think they're going to be battling throughout the whole season. It's not like they're going to have a 5 or 6 game lead like Golden State is, and they're going to have to sit guys. So I think the number of games that Mobley could play, are likely going to be a lot more than some of these other players. So I like him. I like his numbers. I like his upside. I think that they had a really good. I think they had a really good pick in him last year. 15 points last year, 8.3 rebounds. He's going to get you, a handful of other counting stats. And I think that what I like about Mobley is I don't think we've seen the best of him yet. And I think that when you talk about some of these other players, we've already seen what their ceiling is. I think that last year is likely Mobley's floor. I think that he's going to benefit from having somebody like Mitchell on the court. Mitchell commands a tremendous amount of attention. So I look for his game to improve and move forward. So we'll see. I think that maybe we might have a side bet on number of wins for Cleveland this year, but I digress. Let's move forward. And we're going to skip Robert Williams. We already talked about him a little bit. We had him down at 10. He's probably moving down towards that 15 line after the news over the last couple of days. The next person on the list is going to be Rudy Gobert. And Gobert has been a fantasy monster for years. And this year is obviously just going to be different. He's moving to Minnesota, and there are a lot of mouths to feed, certainly with the Wolves. The Wolves are very similar to the Cavs, a young nucleus of players who are really good. The Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, and adding Gobert is a huge get for them in reality. But this is one of those moves where reality might be a little bit better than fantasy, because Gobert it's just unlikely he's going to be able to put up the numbers that he did in Utah. I still like him. He's still certainly a top 10 center, but I think that he's going to be one of those players who is likely overdrafted in a lot of leagues, and he's probably going to be a little bit of a disappointment if you were expecting him to replicate exactly what he did last year or in years past. So I think he's going to be a guy who's around 15 points a game. He's going to be an elite level rebounder, probably 12, 13, 14 even rebounds per game. You're not going to get assists. You're never going to get a 3-pointer from him. You're not going to get really much else outside of a couple blocks. So there are questions about just how effective he can be, playing next to Cat. I think it's going to be a really interesting experiment, but I think this is one of those deals that goes down as being better in reality than fantasy. What do you think?
Yeah, so this is where I probably differed most when it came to the consensus of Fantasy Pros and Yahoo here. When you bring Gobert over to Minnesota, I think who stands to lose the most is Karl Anthony Towns, because that really takes him out. He never really wanted to be a back to the basket center. He never really wanted to bang. When he did, it was more for show. It was if he was trying to get back at somebody. It's kind of a 1v1 type territorial battle that he's having with somebody he's irritated with. So it wasn't something that was consistently part of his game. So this affords him the ability to kind of get outside and stretch the floor behind the three-point line, which he loves shooting. So he might be the first center to average 10 three-pointers a game, Gobert's game translates in Minnesota on the defensive end and on the rebounding end pretty seamlessly, because he's going to be that guy who's there to make sure that, D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards, that they're covered on the weak side. So I think those numbers stay. This could be a scenario where Gobert is really back in that top 5 for the centers for this reason only. I think every offensive basket opportunity he gets is going to be more or less easy. It's going to be a dump because the defense is going to be focused on other people. So he should get easy looks. So his percentages at 71%, those are freak percentages from the field. This is odd to say, but I don't expect that dropping much. So he knows what he knows. He's not a three-point shooter. He's not going to go out and attempt that. Obviously we'd like to see his free throw percentage go up over the 69% from last season, but I think field goal attempts are going to drop. He only took 7.5 attempts last year. I think he's just going to get easy dumps in the basket and putbacks that are, a result of offensive rebounds. So 12, 14, 15 points, somewhere in that range. Rebounds at 14.7. I think that dips a little bit, probably closer to 12. Blocks, he's still going to be, fighting for the top 5 in the league in blocks. So he's not going to have much of a drop off. I think he sees a little bit of a regression, but Karl Anthony Towns, I think we'll see the biggest bump on that. So, and that is kind of counter to what some of the ADPs for the league and drafts so far this season have shown. So, I actually think Gobert moves up the list by the time this season's done.
And I think this is where you and I differ the most, not specifically on Rudy Gobert per se, but I think just from a team building perspective, and granted, there's no one way to build a team, whether that's fantasy basketball, fantasy baseball, fantasy football. There are lots of different ways to do it. I have always been a player who, when I'm taking high in the draft, I want to take guys who I essentially know exactly what I'm going to get from them. And then as the draft goes on, I'm going to lean on my knowledge to get some of these other sleeper players who other guys either don't know about or haven't studied up enough about, and try to get my extra points from some of those guys on my bench that I think are going to be better than other competitors' benches. So the way my teams work, I typically have maybe the 4th or 5th best starting 5, but I usually have either the 1st or 2nd best bench. And that's just the way that I build, because I want to have that element of safety and security. I don't like to have a lot of question marks. I think that you are more on the spectrum of, let's take guys with high upside and blow up potential. I think our bench is likely going to look very similar in terms of value, but it's just building that top 5 that you and I likely just go about it a different way. So it's interesting to me. I don't think that there isn't a magical formula. I think it's easy to say that, like, for me, it would be easy to say, well, my way is the best way because, this guy got hurt and this guy didn't produce and this guy didn't do this. Well, the same thing could happen, the opposite end of the spectrum there. These guys that I get could be very average, and, I could have guys with really, really high floors, but you might be the guy who ends up taking Zion Williamson, early in the draft and see him blow up and then end up just running away with the league championship. So I think that there are lots of different ways to build a team. There are lots of different ways to go. I think that the cool thing about our show and us as individuals is we do things in a different way, so we can provide lots of different perspectives on team building and how to go about doing it. I love doing this show because our job is to provide as much information and analysis as we can to those who listen to it. And then it's really up to them to go and make those decisions. But we are never going to be the type of people who just bang the table and say, this is the only way to do it, and this is the only way to build a team. It's just not true. I've been in this fantasy space for the better part of 2 decades. If there was an end-all, be-all magic formula, I'm confident that I would know what it is. There isn't one in basketball. There isn't one in football. All you can do is get yourself as much information as you can to move forward and make the most educated decisions as you can. And a lot of it is all about risk tolerance.
And a lot of people play in leagues that are just passive, and some play in leagues that there's significant money on the line. I think that kind of what you're saying, if there was a cookie cutter way to win your league, everybody would do it. So when you step back and you think, why do I enjoy playing fantasy sports? And why have I, for instance, played fantasy basketball since I was 12 years old? It's because every time you think that you have done everything, like, I'll read incessantly on articles and I'll do my spreadsheets and this, that, and the other. And then a monkey wrench will get thrown that you're not expecting, or someone will have a breakthrough season that you weren't anticipating, or, there's so many variables that you cannot calculate it. I don't care what kind of algorithm you're using. And that's what makes it fun. It's the perpetual chase for the perfect roster. And you can't ever satisfy that. I mean, there's going to be times where I've lost good money. There have been times when I've had the best team for 13 weeks out of the season, then I have one injury and then the wheels just fall off. I've had some where I've been fighting for playoff spots and I end up winning my league just because my guys showed up when it mattered, come playoff time. So that's what makes the game fun. I think regardless of what method you take, whether it's Ken's or mine, all that I ask is, or all I implore you to do when you're in your leagues is to be diligent to whatever your model is and then learn from it. So either it's going to work for you or you're going to need to make modifications, but that's what makes it fun. Enjoy it while you're in it. We talk about drafting guys that they're guys I won't draft because I just physically don't like them. I don't want to read articles about them. I just don't. So if I've got somebody who's going to give me 36 points a game on the board and another one is going to give me 35.4, but I just can't stand, like Jimmy Butler, for instance, that's the guy for me. If there's somebody who's going to give me comparable value, I'll take him just because I don't want to have to read about Jimmy Butler and be worried about Jimmy Butler all season because I want to enjoy it. I'm out there with a group of friends, maybe it's some people you don't know. Don't be so beholden. There's a lot of flexibility in how you can draft, so you don't have to put yourself in a situation where you draft your roster and you hate it all season long. There's no fun in that. And to be honest with you, if you're in a league with guys who do that, they're more likely the ones who are going to drop off midway through the season. They're not going to answer your trade requests. They're going to be dumping guys in the wire, which is just such a lowbrow move. It's that type of stuff that makes it takes the fun out of it. So what we try to do is give you perspective to keep you engaged, hopefully keep your league engaged, make sure you're making sound decisions and put you in a good position to win. So let's move on to number 8. Speaking of winning, they had their fair share of success last season. I think Ken and I differ on what that's going to translate into the next few seasons, but that's Jarrett Allen of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Last year, an all-star season for Jarrett. He's really known as a defensive specialist, but last year offensively, his load went up just under 10 field goals a game, but gave you 16 points. Again, he's a double-double machine you can almost clock him in for a guaranteed. There's some guys who hit it that 10.8, which is what his rebound account was last year. And that could comprise games where you have 6 rebounds and some where you have 15. There's not a lot of variability. I mean, when you see Jarrett Allen at 10.8, that is a pretty consistent 10.8 across the board. So if you're in a 4-game week, expect him to get you 40 rebounds for that week and 4 double-doubles. Assists, 1.6, which is good for that team. Again, 1.3 blocks, which is what you would expect from a guy who focuses on the defensive end. He makes the lives of Garland and this season Mitchell's job much easier. He's also a good safety blanket for Evan Mobley as he begins to kind of ascend, because I agree with Ken. I think we saw his floor last year. He's definitely, and when I brought up Tim Duncan earlier, that's only because there's a lot of people in the basketball world who believes that this is the second coming of Tim Duncan, and I'm not ready to subscribe to that article just yet. Field goal percentages, 67%. I mean, you can't honestly, you can't ask for anything better than that. He shot a couple threes last season, so I just look at that as a negligible stat. And from a free throw percentage at 70% from a center, that's realistic, and I'll take that. So this is a guy who is solid. I think that he gets overlooked in leagues just because, I mean, there's still some people that I talk to who look at him as like a backup center, which is just asinine at this point. I mean, the guy was an all-star last year. So if he's out there, he's got 5th round value. I don't think that he has the potential to move up. Like I said, I think there's some flexibility with Rudy Gobert that could end up seeing him be one of the top centers from a fantasy standpoint. I don't see that potential from Jarrett Allen, but I definitely think he's got that top 10 value for a center. And I love guys, like I said, that give me double-double multipliers if you're in a league. Try to grab them if they're there. So definitely high up on Jarrett Allen, more so than I am the Cleveland Cavaliers. What about you, Ken?
Well, Cleveland's going to be awful. There's just no doubt about it. Cleveland's going to be terrible. You look at that roster.
That is not what I'm saying.
I'm just saying Mitchell's not going to be happy. Darius Garland is going to want the rock. He's going to want to be the alpha. He's going to be upset that I called him a Robin instead of a Batman. This thing is going to turn, instead of the League of Super Friends, this is going to be like the League of Super Enemies. Evan Mobley's going to continue to grow and sink the value of Jarrett. Like, there are going to be some really, really rough days. So if you want,
so extreme.
I'm just saying,
so extreme.
Yeah, no, it's just, I mean, if you want a guy on your roster who's going to get you, 66% from the line or from the field. He's going to shoot free throws around a 72% clip. He's going to get you 16 and 10 every night. I mean, I guess you can go ahead and get him, but you'd have to root for Cleveland, and who knows? They could go 0 and 30 to start the season and just shut all these guys down. But Jared Allen is one of those guys in the top 7 or 8 who I think you could take and put on your roster and feel safe about it. Do you have a rebuttal? Because I just heard you just no. I'm talking and then I just hear these noises from you like.
Here's my thing. The bandwagon jumpers for Cleveland, I'm just holding, because take last season out of it, because I think Golden State ends up winning the title, fantastic, but I don't think they win the title if Chris Middleton is healthy. I think Milwaukee ends up winning the East, and then they end up going on to win their second championship. But if you go back 2 seasons, the West has been a juggernaut and has dominated the NBA for 15 years in a row. The East is now the place where the power is. And at the top, it is very heavy. Philadelphia is stacked. Milwaukee stacked. Boston stacked. Toronto is stacked. I just don't see Cleveland making a dent against any one of those 4 teams. So my question is Donovan Mitchell, who has not proven to be a leader, when you have 3 young guys in Cleveland, and there is definitely upside and potential in Cleveland. I agree. I just think Mitchell's the wrong type of individual to bring into that environment, and I don't think he's going to be a net positive. So that is my concern for Cleveland. So maybe all of this stems from, I would have liked to have seen the fruition of a young core, because it fell apart in Philadelphia. It fell apart in OKC. I hope that it happens with this version of OKC, but you've got a group in Cleveland that has organically grown, 1 trade in Jared Allen, but let them be a young group that comes together. And now you bring in a quote unquote alpha like Donovan Mitchell, who I just think he's better than he is. I think that's going to affect other guys on that roster. And that's why I say when it comes to crunch time, don't be shocked if he's not on the floor when it matters, when you got Ricky Rubio out there. So I don't know. I just think there could be contention in the ranks at some point. So I'm just not high on it. And I could be completely wrong, but let's go ahead and timestamp this and this conversation. Maybe we circle back to it and I either have egg on my face, or Yoo-hoo for that matter, or I end up being, the Dalai Lama and I called
it. Either way could happen. I will admit that.
So you will admit that I could be the Dalai Lama.
Oh yes, there's that's for sure. Yeah,
Good.
For sure. I think so. In fact, I've oftentimes referred to you as the Dalai Lama, for sure. You've probably referred to me as the Dolly Parton. But anyway, as we move forward here, we look at, and I think this is one of those. I think from a fan perspective, I would just like it to work out in Cleveland. You and I are old enough, and for the listeners out there, you guys don't know, but James and I are in our 70s. But we have, our view of the Cleveland Cavaliers is a lot different than those people out there who are, 18, 19, 20 years old. They grew up watching LeBron James in Cleveland, and they grew up watching this Cleveland Cavaliers franchise being good for many, many years. The fact of the matter is, this is a franchise that has historically been terrible. It's very similar to the LA Clippers. A lot of young folks out there look at the Clippers and think, oh, well, yeah, LA's always had 2 good teams. No, they haven't. The Clippers are historically the single worst franchise. And you look at the Kings. The Kings had a few years of dominant performances when they had Weber and Divac and Jason Williams, and you go down the line, Stojakovic, but historically they've been really bad. So I would like to see Cleveland be good without LeBron. I think that the fans there deserve that. So we'll just see what happens. I don't know. It's an interesting experiment. I think that it's one of the storylines as you move forward. So a storyline in the offseason was that of DeAndre Ayton. Ayton, of course, signed the offer sheet with Indiana. Was close to going there, at least he thought, but then the Suns jumped in and matched it. So he got a bag. So, and this isn't the bag that Sean Miller tried to give him in Arizona. But this is a real bag, a bag of cash for sure. And Ayton really deserves it, in terms of his play. um, playing over 30 minutes a game, and his field goal percentage has been really, really good. So 63%. Free throw shooting could be improved around 72%. Not going to be a guy who shoots a lot of threes or makes a lot of threes. And you just kind of know what you're going to get from him. It's going to be an 18 and 10 just about every time he walks out onto the court. I actually think that he's hit his ceiling. I don't see Ayton as being a player who is ever going to be a 25 and 12 guy. I just don't see him as the second coming of anything. I think he just kind of is what he is, but what he is right now is a pretty good player in reality and a pretty good addition to a team in fantasy as well. I guess to me, if I don't get Jokic, Embiid, some of these like really, really elite players, I'm kind of punting on the position for a while, and I'll let somebody else take Ayton, and I'll take somebody like Gobert, Mobley, Jared Allen, Miles Turner. I'll take somebody like that instead of trying to overdraft Ayton, because I think that he is what he is at this point.
Yeah, so I definitely differ as far as the ceiling is concerned because, Phoenix, we've talked about this a couple episodes in a row now, but I think we're sadly starting to see the regression of Chris Paul to a point where I think even he is smart enough to know that I'm going to have to really, really move my game away from the basket and set people up. Part of the contention that kind of went down between Ayton and Phoenix was due to what he felt was a perceived slight with offensive touches and the offense not necessarily running through him. I don't think he's ever demanded that. It's just not in his nature to kind of be that way. He's just looking for an opportunity to kind of create things at the basket. And I also think that he realizes that taking that focus and bringing some attention onto himself in the paint also frees up opportunities for easier shots for Chris Paul, because his inability to beat people off the dribble is definitely going to affect them this upcoming season. But it also frees up Devin Booker, who I think he's going to have a tough go this season with facing every double team that can be thrown. So at 17.2 points and 10 rebounds, again, I think that, like Jared Allen, those are consistent 10 rebounds. I definitely think, especially this season, if his field goal percentages get closer to, or field goal attempts get closer to 15 at 63% clip, now you're looking at 21 points a game. Any missed opportunities around the basket, get you, if he pushes that rebound total back up to for 2 seasons to go at 11.5. From a block perspective, at his size and his mobility, I'd like to see his blocks get up above 1. I think at 0.7 last season, that's unacceptable. So if he gets back to that 1.2, 1.5, now you're talking a guy who is bringing you significant fantasy value with very little negative. It's 75% from the field. So I like him here. Yes, I agree with your strategy. If you want somebody to take, maybe punt on the position if you can't get one of the top 4 picks, but I could argue that 2 of the top 4 picks are really, really question marks in my books as to whether or not I would take that risk. So I definitely see value at 58 games, 69 games the last 2 seasons for Ayton. Again, I think for a center, we're kind of putting that bar at 60 as our over-under. So that's realistic for me. So I like Ayton, and I definitely think he has a little bit more in the tank and a little bit more to show. And I'm looking for something more along the lines of 20 points a game, 11 rebounds, get that block closer to 1 per game. Assist probably stays the same, and I would expect the field goal percentages to stay around 60%. So I like his value. So let's see. Who we have next is Nikola Vucevic of the Chicago Bulls. So again, another player that, depending on the IQ, the league and player IQ of your fantasy draft, they may look to punt on this just because they don't know anything about him or they can't pronounce his name. It might be interesting to hear how they say it. But the Chicago Bulls center last season missed out on being an all-star. First time in 4 seasons, first time in the last 4 seasons that he missed out. Numbers dropped a little bit last season, 17.6 points, 11 rebounds, 3.2 assists. The rebounds and assists are pretty consistent, but just dipped a little bit. 3-point percentage dropped. That is concerning, considering that he's still taking 4.5 attempts a game. His field goal attempts overall dropped. I think that was kind of, the acquisition of DeMar DeRozan. The guy was averaging just under 21 field goal attempts a game. So that really, Vucevic's numbers are where that bite came from primarily. 47% from the field with as close as he is to the basket. So this is one of those guys who I think the consensus ranking for him in ADP leagues has been based on what have you done for me in the past versus what do I intend or what do I anticipate you doing for me this season or in the future. So I think we see a continual regression, maybe not by much, but fantasy stats from last year, I think pushing around 17 points a game, 11 rebounds. I think those are consistent. So I actually see Vuce falling out of the top 10 at the end of the season as far as moving forward. He's going to be 32 years old this season. And some of the higher picks, you've mentioned this before as far as guys getting overdrafted. I see him being a guy who's overdrafted. I'm not saying he's on the decline at 32 years old, but I just think that the way that offense was set up last year, if they're still going to be feeding DeMar DeRozan for 21 attempts a game until that changes, I think Vuce is going to be directly the most impacted. So what are your thoughts?
No, much the same. I think that there really isn't much of a reason for the Bulls to stray away from what made them successful last year. And it is concerning. I think that Vuce is a player who was a little bit of the victim of circumstance, because when he was in Orlando for those 10 some odd years, he had some great seasons, like really great seasons, 25-12 level seasons. And it's just unfortunate because those Orlando teams were just so bad. A lot of people just weren't able to see him really in his prime. Now, I'm not saying he's over the hill here, as you said, he's going to be 32, but 12 seasons in the league, that's a lot of miles. For sure. His minutes per game didn't dip at all last year. It's right around 33, which is kind of surprising. I would think that it'd be closer to 30 at his age. He's a consistent rebounder, and I think that's what you hang your hat on. He's going to get you 11 rebounds a night, and obviously that's going to make up for any type of scoring regression. But I think that he's going to be more of a 16 and 11 guy than more of a 20 and 12 guy. So I do think there's a little bit of regression coming here, but again, he's part of a big tier of players who you can get who are all very, very similar. So I think he's a solid pick. You pretty much know what you're going to get with him. But in terms of upside or ceiling, does he have an upside of, say, somebody like Mobley? No. Does he have an upside of somebody like Gobert? No. But again, this is a high floor level player. So if you miss out on some of these other players, this is certainly, a solid pick. I mean, nobody's going to shake their head and think you're an idiot by taking Vucevic. He's going to be a good player in the league and in fantasy as well. So let's move ahead. I think this is where you and I are probably going to stop the show, meet somewhere in the middle of a city park, like snapping our fingers at each other like the outsiders and getting a big old fist fight over this player. You and I just really, really differ on the value of this particular player who comes in at number 5, and that's Anthony Davis. To me, and I will give you, as much airtime as you want on this, James, but to me, I'm not touching him. I love Anthony Davis as a player. I think that he is obviously phenomenal. And his ability to score and rebound, pass the ball, he is an elite level shot blocker. Multipliers galore with him. The problem is just the number of games that you expect to get from him, because, and I hate that label too. We've talked about this before of being injury prone, but you look at the last 4 years. Okay, the last year in New Orleans, 56 games. First year in LA, 62. Second year in LA, 36. Last year, 40. And while I do think the Lakers are primed and upset and ready for another run and should be better this year, the Westbrook situation, I think, is still a distraction for them. We know what Davis is going to do when he's on the court, but I just don't trust that he's going to be on the court enough for me to invest the capital that it's going to take to get him, because it's probably going to be somewhere in that... he's going to be gone in the top 20. So would I take him in the top 15? I probably wouldn't, which means if I fade him that far, I'm just not going to get him. I would rather take somebody else like Bam Adebayo, Vucevic, Ayton, somebody else who I think I'm going to get more from in terms of number of games played than I would with Davis. This is not an indictment on his talent. I know that there's talk that, well, he's regressing because his numbers have gone down. Yes, they have. But realistically, did you expect him to average 28 points and 11 rebounds, with the Lakers? No, there was no way he was going to do that. So could he be a guy who gets you 26 and 9? He could. But in my estimation, just from a historical perspective and with my concerns about health, I see him as a player who's going to get you probably 23 and 10, but it's going to come in probably 45 to 50 games played. He has a tendency to just get nicked up, and that's enough to scare me away from him. And if he has a blow up year for somebody else, great. Then they're going to benefit from it. But I wouldn't spend the draft capital on him when there are other players who could give me somewhat similar value right about in the same range. So I'm going to give James probably the better part of the next hour. You can talk about your thoughts on Anthony Davis, and then we'll move forward.
No, I mean, I know that we differ here, but with Anthony in particular, this is my draft philosophy, is I think that you can afford to take a risk on one individual, but you shouldn't take it on two. So let's just give you an example. Let's just say that you're drafting 12th in your league. So you're on the turn, and so you're at 12-13. Like at 12-13, you have the opportunity to have Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving that are on the table. You don't take two chances like that. There's just too much risk associated with that. What Anthony Davis has missed since he came to LA from New Orleans is he's missed any leadership that has established roles. And it's very difficult to do when you have LeBron James on your team, because it's always going to come down to, well, whose team is it? Is this Frank Vogel's team who's defining the roles and who's doing what, or is it what LeBron wants to do? And if Frank Vogel says, well, let's know it's what I want to do because I'm the coach, well, is Jeannie Buss going to come down and say, well, yeah, we're not going to do that? Or is Rob Pelinka going to come down and say, well, we're not going to do that? So I think that Anthony Davis has always been a guy that if there's no structure, he's just loosey-goosey, and that's where he kind of gets aloof. I think when he's not in a system, there's no motivation. And when he's not motivated and he's aloof, that's when he ends up getting injured. So if this was 10 years ago, I don't touch Anthony Davis with the games played at 62, 36, and 40 over the last 4 seasons. In today's game, with load management, with guys that are playing, if we're talking about having a bar for our posts at 55 games and a bar for our wings and forwards at 65 games as our over-under mark, I'm less inclined to worry about that if I believe that there's some sort of structure in LA for this season. So Darvin Ham comes in, he's saying all the right things. I think LeBron needs to actually mean it when he says that we're going to run our offense through AD. This is where it's going to start. I'm in my 21st season of the league. I don't care. I'm not one of those people who thinks that the Westbrook situation is like a cloud that's looming over the Lakers, and I just don't. Because for all intents and purposes, if you were to look at the statistical productivity and output that Russell Westbrook gives you, even to this day, even from his shooting percentages and clips, he's still in the top third for players at his position. So stop it. Like, he's just not MVP Russ, and sadly, everybody expects him to be MVP Russ. Well, you just said a second ago, you cannot do that when you're on a team with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. So, from a sheer statistical standpoint, the guy's a juggernaut. I mean, juggernaut. 23 points a game, 9.9 rebounds. So, I want to see that get back to 10. I think if his focus is back to the basket and less trying to play the combo, point forward, I think he hits that 10 mark again. Blocks, he's always going to be a juggernaut. So you're getting a multiplier. Points, rebounds, his shooting percentages are great. His 3-point percentage is garbage. So that's where I think that the red light needs to come on and say, no, you're a power forward, a stretch power forward, but not a stretch 3 power forward. So he's got a high basketball IQ. I think he realized that didn't work last season. And if Darvin Ham defines roles going into the season, here's why I think he's going to have a huge year. The Lakers cannot afford to miss the playoffs again. No ifs, ands, or buts. So they're coming out on fire. LeBron's not sitting on back-to-backs. AD's not sitting on back-to-backs. They need to build enough cushion for when the later portion of the season, when fatigue starts to set in and things like that, that they're not fighting for a play-in game spot. They're just not going to do it. So I think they're going to have all hands on deck, and they're going to punch people in the throat. This is a big FU season for those three in particular, Westbrook, LeBron, and AD. And I think AD, if the offense is running through him, he's going to be the one. He's going to be the one to have. So I understand your concerns when it comes to games played. But if I'm talking the spread between the center bar that I'm setting at 55 games, and he played 40 last season with a significant injury, if nothing else, I'm going to take him, watch him put up juggernaut numbers, and if I start to feel shaky going into the playoffs, and if I'm in a good position in my fantasy league, I'm going to look to package him for either another superstar, or if not, I'm going to get 2 reserve players that are giving me 30 plus a game, and I'm going to have them, and I'm going to do like what you said earlier and make sure that my bench is completely locked up, because there's potential for that with him. So he may be nothing other than a significant trade asset. I think he's going to be crazy the first 2 months of the season.
So let me ask you this. So I guess the it's not a catchphrase, but I don't know what it is, but people a lot of times in the preseason will say, this is my ride or die, quote unquote. Okay, the player who you are going to likely have in just about every fantasy draft that you partake in, because you're going to draft him maybe a smidge higher than everybody else, or you're not, concerned about the risk. So, like, from a football perspective, the best ride or die this year would be somebody like Jalen Hurts, where there were question marks about him coming into the season, and people didn't know, okay, is he going to be a fantasy superstar, or is he going to fall flat on his face? So a lot of people had Hurts as their ride or die. Is Anthony Davis your ride or die player for this basketball season? The player who you think is going to be the one that puts teams over the top?
No, so I don't draft that way. So I look at everybody as being expendable. I don't put my emotion into when I draft.
But
so
if you had to choose one player this year as the key player who you think is going to be, I guess, drafted in a position where they outplay their ADP, or they outplay their value by so much that they're the one player who's on most or a ton of basketball championship teams.
So I guess what I'm trying to get with your question, are you implying somebody who, because from an ADP and a value perspective, Anthony Davis's numbers aren't going to change. So we know he's a juggernaut. It's just, do you think that he, like, the biggest make or break? I don't think he's the biggest make or break. I think Kyrie is, because from a statistical standpoint, if Kyrie plays, there's a higher probability from a health standpoint that he's going to play more games than Anthony Davis. So from an aggregate, I'm definitely going with Kyrie, although he's got some massive downside. His don't come from injury. His come from off the court issues and things like that. So the ride or die there, who could make or break your league, is if you end up kicking Kyrie on the flip. So let's say you're 14, 15, 16, and he ends up having an FU season, you win your league, because a lot of people are going to defer and pass on him. And he definitely, if he's right, is top round value, and you got him in the second round. So you're able to get it. I'm assuming if you're on the flip and he gets down to you, that means you're in a 5, 6, 7 pick in your draft. So you're getting him around that range on the flip side. So that puts you around that 21, 22. You win your league. So Kyrie is that guy for me. I'm not going to take him, but who would meet that standard. I just think Anthony Davis, my philosophy when I draft a guy like this is, do I think he can make a massive impact and allow me to win the first 4 weeks of my season, right? And then from there, if somebody's struggling and they're engaged in the fantasy season and I don't want them to be disengaged, I may throw out a trade and say, hey, check this out. I'm going to do you a solid. I'm going to give you this guy for 2 30-game-a-week averages, because that's to say my bench isn't shored up. So I go and I shore up my bench. If I'm in a situation, A, I've got padding in my league, B, if I've got trepidation or reservations that he's not going to be able to get through the entire season, Anthony Davis that is, I may look to sell high on him. So I have drafted people in the past with the full intention selling high. Like Kawhi Leonard. No, not Kawhi Leonard. Actually, I'll take him away. But there are people who, if they're on dog shit teams or if they start to tank, I'm looking for guys who I know that for the rest of the season, they're going to, like a Josh Giddey, for instance, or a Poku. I may try to grab him in a package deal because I know that for when it matters to me from a fantasy perspective, when we're going through our playoffs, that's when teams say, well, this season didn't work out the way we wanted, so we're just going to go ahead and cash our checks and let our bench get some run. I'm looking to benefit off of that by maybe packaging a guy who I think they're going to start to load management up to the playoffs, so like a Paul George or a Kawhi Leonard, who would have given me all my value at the beginning of the season, but they're not going to give. They're going to be dog shit from. Sorry, my language, but they're going to be bad for me when we get towards fantasy playoffs. So Anthony Davis is more of a trade chip, who's going to give me massive value for at least the first 4 weeks, 5 weeks of the season, and then I will assess what I need to do with him moving forward. But I could get something in return for him if I sell him when he's hot. Could that blow up in my face? Yes, it could. But a lot of deals could, to be honest with you. I mean, Gordon Hayward in the first game as a Boston Celtic blows his ankle out. I mean, he was valued to be a 45-point-a-game fantasy guy. So if you grabbed him, I mean, he was late first round, early second round value that year. So it could always happen. I still take Anthony Davis because everything is pointing towards him being the focal point of the offense this year. It seems like the Lakers are bought into it, and they can't afford to lose again. So I think they're going to have all hands on deck. At the very least, come out of the gate with full momentum for the first 8 weeks of the season. Then I'll reassess.
No, it makes sense. I just think that he is one of those giant wild cards in fantasy leagues this year. There's no question about it. So let's go ahead and move on. We're into the top four here. Some of the elite centers. I think everybody probably understands who's going to be at top of the list, but doesn't mean that numbers 2, 3, and 4 are going to be these ham and eggers out there. So you look at Bam Adebayo of the Heat, and you look at his progression as a player, and it really is pretty amazing. So, a player who came out, the 14th pick of the draft, nobody expected him to be quite this good coming out of Kentucky. Certainly a young kid. Everybody saw potential in him, but boy, he has blossomed into one of the NBA's great centers. So you look at his progression: 7 points as a rookie, then 9, then 16, then 18.7 in last year, career year, 19.1 points per game, 10.1 rebounds per game, 3.4 assists, get you a block a game, get you a steal and a half. He's one of those guys who, in 33 minutes a night, is going to be a stat stuffer. I think that he still has a way to go. I think that we have not seen the best from him quite yet. I love the fit in Miami. I think that they are a team that really, really understands how to use him effectively. Field goal percentage is going to be elite. Free throw percentage is going to be below average, but not in the terrible range, probably somewhere around 75%. The only thing that would really push Bam into the upper echelon here of centers would be his ability to hit some threes. I don't think his rebounding numbers are going to get up to 13, 14 a game. They're just not. But still, you can't complain. I think that this is the year that Bam has a chance to average 20 points a game. So I think he's going to be a 20 and 10 guy. He's going to get you 4 assists. He's going to get you a handful of steals and blocks. He's not going to turn the ball over that much. It's going to be under 3. So I really like him. I mean, certainly he's not in the top 2 here, but I do think you could do a lot worse than Bam at 4.
Yeah, Bam is solid. I'm concerned. I think this is really the last year that the Miami team, as it's constructed right now, is in the conversation for being a playoff contender for the Eastern Conference. Because of this experiment with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry, if it doesn't kind of provide some fruit towards the end of the season, I would look for them to make some pretty significant changes. Tyler Hero's been the talk for a while, as far as somebody that other rosters have wanted in trade talks. And then you're looking at a possible rebuild for somebody like Bam, which could be really, really good from him from a fantasy standpoint, really, really bad from him from an actual standpoint, because I think Miami would really need a full overhaul of that roster. So I agree with you. I think this is going to be an all-star season for him this year. He has slowly progressed up in points. His field goal attempts have continued to go up. All the while, he's maintained good percentages from the field. So I think the trust is in him from his entire team. I think that there is a toughness that comes with having a guy like Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry on your squad that he's been able to kind of take that on and add that to his tool belt. So I like his game a lot. He's just he's quiet. There's nothing about his game that really is loud to me. So I would imagine he's going to be there late in the second round, early third round, just because of the centers we have. And centers aren't really a priority pick in fantasy drafts unless you're in the top 3. So you're going to get that double-double value, the multiplier value from a guy like Bam. So, and consistency, again, we're having this conversation, but, 64 games 2 seasons ago, 56 games last year. But 4 seasons ago, he played in all 82 games, which that just isn't heard of. But it kind of goes to show you that it's just a slow regression in the importance of making sure that guys are on the floor. So I think the days of drafting somebody expecting them to play 65 games are unrealistic. When he's on the floor, though, he gives you big stats. Definitely a top 5 center in the league. I think he's an all-star this season, and I think, like you said, I think he pushes over that 20-point hump. So I really, really like him. I'd like to move on to one where, again, I think this is one where you and I are going to differ, and we talked about it briefly, but the consensus rankings from Fantasy Pros, Yahoo, and ours combined have Karl-Anthony Towns as the number 3 ranked center for this upcoming season from a fantasy perspective. And I don't know that I would go at that high. Bam Adebayo, he's a perfect example of a guy who I just think from a consistency standpoint, the scenery didn't change, the personnel didn't change enough to really affect his game. But you bring in an all-star center like Rudy Gobert in Minnesota, who is just a back-to-the-basket guy who makes defense a priority when Karl hasn't his entire career in Minnesota. And what I hate about it is that it affords Towns the ability to kind of be lazy and to settle for shots that I just don't think are in his best interest, which is that 3-point shot. Because this is a guy who last season, 4.9 attempts, 3 seasons ago, he was at 8 attempts. I mean, you bring a guy like Gobert in to kind of fill that paint. I'm not going to be shocked if I'm looking at the stat line midway through the season and Karl-Anthony Towns is averaging 8-9 3-pointers a game as a center, which is just ridiculous to me. Now, the argument is he's shooting 41% when he does it. So he's efficient. 40% for his career. So it's not like that was just a one-time deal. So if you got a center at 40%, that's a pretty consistent shooter. What I love about Karl-Anthony Towns is I think from an intellectual IQ, he's very smart. So he has the potential to translate that onto the floor. What I don't like about Karl-Anthony Towns is he has, in my opinion, a very poor basketball IQ. He makes a lot of bonehead decisions. We saw that during the playoff series against Memphis. He just couldn't stay on the floor. He was the team's most important player last season, and he just got in foul trouble. And just these were stupid ticky-tack fouls that just are unnecessary. And as a fantasy owner, if you're doing that in the regular season, those are missed opportunities. I just don't like the prospect of what his season's going to look like if he's living behind the 3-point line and he's not playing defense. Because then, we saw a dip. He had a career low in rebounds last year, just under 10. So now you lose your double-double multiplier if that goes down anymore. Assists dipped 3.6. I don't anticipate that getting any higher. Blocks, he was at 1.1 last season. Again, if he's not back to the basket and your primary defender, look for that to dip below 1. Steals, that'll probably stay the same. He's got good hands. He's very athletic for his size. Turnovers at 3.1. That's been pretty consistent throughout his career. So if you're shooting more threes, you have to maintain a 40% clip as a center in order to keep your total percentage at 53. So I just think the change that he's going to make in his game is going to make it more difficult to keep the stat line he had last year. So I would look for a fantasy regression. Doesn't mean he's not a powerhouse. Doesn't mean he's not a top 5 center, because he peppers the stat sheet across the board. I just think it's going to be less than last year. So if you're expecting the same value in Towns, I wouldn't hold my breath.
You and I don't differ as much as you might think. in terms of his value. I think that as a player, Cat he's amazing, and the numbers he's put up have been just unreal over the span of his 7 seasons in Minnesota. Personally, I'm happy for him that they made the move for Gobert. I think he's been pretty loyal to Minnesota, and they've had some really, really rough seasons. But you look at him, and the big question with Cat is, with Gobert in town, what happens to that rebounding number? I don't see any way it goes up. So you look at the last 4 years, 12.4, 10.8, 10.6, 9.8. I think that number is going to dip down to somewhere between 8 and 9 with Gobert in town. So you do lose that double-double multiplier, and that's a problem. The question is, are a few more made threes per game going to mitigate what you lose on the rebounding side? And it very well could. He is a solid three-point shooter. I mean, for a guy who's 6'11" to shoot 40% from three, that's pretty amazing. I think there is some regression here. I don't think it's going to be major. I just look at the centers that we have, and I look at our 1, 2, and 3, and I don't see any way where there's somebody else who you would take in the top 3. I also don't see any way that you could take them in any other order. I think that...
Can I ask you a question? And I think that this is one of the rare instances where this matters from a fantasy perspective. Do you think Karl Anthony Towns, do you think his priority is winning? And the reason why you're thinking, when I'm looking at 1, 2, and 3, and I look at Bam and even Anthony Davis, I think that their sole priority is winning basketball games. And when we talked earlier in another episode, I think it was Anthony Simons, we were talking about why his rebounding numbers were so low considering his athleticism. And you brought up a great point. It's because he doesn't have a desire to be a good rebounder. He doesn't have the effort. He doesn't put that in. If you bring a guy like Gobert in and he affords you the ability to not have to put effort in, if you're not wired to be an effort guy and you're not wired to be a guy who wants to win, what is the driving force? He just naturally steps on the court and produces, but do you think that he has that in him to try now that he doesn't have to?
I think that's a valid question, and I think it's also a difficult one to answer. I do think that he is interested in his statistics. And I think that from a fantasy perspective, I think that helps. So does he have, would you look at Cat and say this guy has Mamba mentality? Likely not. But I do think that he is cognizant of his place in NBA history, his place in NBA folklore, if you will. I think that he is proud of the fact that he's averaged, 25 a game for the last 6 years. I don't think he's going to be the type of player who just defers to Anthony Edwards and Gobert and the others just because he can. I do think that you have a valid point with him making some very bad mistakes. He does. And I think that there's going to be a transition here as he moves from center to power forward. But I also think that he's always wanted to play the 4. And I think that he will likely put out some semblance of solid effort just because I think he wants to prove to everybody that he is a 4-man and not a 5-man. And I think that he will do whatever he can to try to produce in that fashion. So I think that he's a bit of a wild card. I do think that there is a good chance for some regression. And I think there's almost 100% chance that regression is going to come on the rebounding side. There just isn't. I just don't see there being a way that he averages 10 plus rebounds. So there are going to be nights where he has double doubles, but I think there are also going to be some nights where, it's 6, 7, 8 rebounds a game. So there's a problem there for sure. But I also look at just his overall talent and ability, and that I'm sold on. So we'll see. I think that if you make it through the first 10, 15 games and you're starting to see this crumble a little bit, this might be a player to cash out on. But I also think that he's about as solid as they come. So if you draft him, don't draft him thinking you're going to get the exact numbers that you did in previous years. But I still think those numbers are going to merit him being at least a top 3 center. So moving on, let's take a look at the top 2. And this I don't think is very arguable at all. I honestly, and I watched him play at Kansas. I did not think that Joel Embiid had this kind of upside, but it is obvious that his talent is off the charts. He is an unbelievable talent at 7 foot and 280 pounds. He could play. Embiid's one of those players who he could play in any era, and the numbers he's put up the last 2 seasons have just been unbelievable. And save the first person who we're going to talk about on our list, I don't know who else you could take at the top of a draft, outside of our number 1 and maybe one other player. But Joel Embiid, 30.6 points per game, 11.7 rebounds, 4.2 assists, 1.5 blocks, 1.1 steals, turnovers, right around 3. This guy is the process, and he has been an amazing, amazing player over the span of the last few seasons. So I love him. I think that he's upset that he was not going to be an all-star or the MVP last year. And I think he's going to come out this year and just go gangbusters on it. He wants to win. He wants to be an NBA champion desperately. The Sixers, they've had some awful performances in the playoffs last year where James Harden just basically refused to shoot. And then the year before with Ben Simmons where he also just refused to be part of the game plan and refused to shoot even when it was a dunk. So he's had some players who have really failed him, but he's never been the failure of the Sixers. So I don't necessarily trust Doc Rivers. I don't necessarily trust that roster, but Embiid I trust with the second pick.
Yeah, and I think he's probably the 4th pick overall in any draft. So for 2 of those to come from the center position, I think Giannis and Luka are the other 2, by all accounts, in probably 99% of the leagues. What I love, and this kind of goes to what I was just talking about with Karl Anthony Towns, Joel Embiid is an absolute character. I think he was made for television. He was made for primetime. He was made for today's culture with YouTube and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and things like that. He's that type of athlete. He's always great for a soundbite, but you cut all of that out, and this guy wants to win, almost to his detriment, because I think some of the injuries that he's had have been a direct result of him putting himself in situations that may not have been the best idea for him or his team. So, as a fan, I didn't like him at first, but he has grown on me in that way that he goes out there and plays hurt. He goes out there and puts himself on the line. So when I look at his games played, so 64, 51, 51, and 68, I'm willing to take a chance on that guy, even though the last 4 seasons have showed me less than 70 games played, because I don't think there's a scenario in which he's sitting that isn't a direct result of I have to sit. It's kind of like Paul George in that way, and that's why I think there's a big difference between him and Kawhi in LA. I think Paul only sits if he physically just can't, and I think it frustrates him, and I know it frustrates Joel. So I love guys like that. I root for guys like that. I think that they're going to be fighting in the Eastern Conference Finals. I think they supplant Boston this season, so they're going to be battling Milwaukee. I'm excited to see James Harden accept his role, and if he does so, and we kind of understand that this is Joel's team and he's going to be the one who leads us, when those 2 are on, James Harden makes Joel's game so much easier. He gives him so much easier looks. He's not getting banged with his back to the basket. Last year, his field goal percentage dropped a little bit, right at 50%. I think James Harden, who understands his role, and some support help from Maxey and Thibault this season offensively, really opens things up for Joel to have a monster season. They're not going to give Jokic the MVP. I think that there's a MVP fatigue with Giannis as well because he's perpetually there. So look for this to be Joel's season. Him and Luka battling it out for that MVP spot. So looks to lead the league in scoring again like he did last season. I think he walks into that. He's at least in the running. Rebounding, His peak was 13.6. I could, getting closer to 12, but we're splitting hairs on what value that provides you. He's a fantasy monster and a guy who wants to be on the floor. So if he's there at the 5th pick, then whoever had the 4th pick in your draft, don't anticipate seeing him in the finals because they just won't be there. Any other feedback on that? Do you think I'm off base?
No,
this guy is just a machine.
He is, and you mentioned Harden giving him easy looks. I honestly think that the Harden Embiid pick and roll is the single toughest set to defend in today's NBA. The way that those guys play off each other, and when things are going well, they're going really, really well. There are questions about the Sixers. I don't think there's any argument about that. Is their genetic makeup going to make them a true championship team, championship contender? You hate to just put it on the shoulders of one guy, but it's probably going to be Harden because you know what you're going to get from Joel. And Joel is just such an absolute stud. And I'm much like you. I've grown to really like him over the last few years. He is, I think, far and away. We may be splitting hairs on, the 3rd player, the 4th player, the 5th player in terms of centers, but the top 2 are just the top 2, and I don't think you can go wrong with either of them. Let's move to number 1, and breaking news, big shocker. It's Nikola Jokic of the Nuggets. The numbers that this man has put up are, and I think the word unbelievable or unreal, like those words are used interchangeably and probably overused as well. There aren't enough superlatives in a dictionary to describe how good Nikola has been over the last couple of seasons. His career numbers are going to go down as some of the best. I mean, barring some type of catastrophic injury, he's going to go down as one of the best centers of all time. 27.1 points per game. Okay, that was a career high. 13.8 rebounds per game. 13.8. That goes down as a career high. 7.9 assists per game. Down just a smidge from 8.3, but it's probably going to be down when you're scoring that much. He'll give you a block a game. He'll give you a steal and a half. He is the single best passing big man I've seen since the days of vintage Arvydas Sabonis. He can almost...
Don't forget he played 74 games.
Right. It's crazy. So he is a plug-and-play machine. And I get offended sometimes when people say, oh, it's a no-brainer pick. Because then it looks like, well, you haven't done your research, you haven't studied, you haven't looked at all the different situations out there that could change things, and you're just kind of going chalk. But if there ever was a no-brainer pick in a fantasy league, it's him. And if you're sitting at the top of the board, the production that you get from him is so far and away above everybody else. You have a chance to win your league. It doesn't even matter so much how you decide to build beneath him, because he's always going to give you a chance each and every week with the numbers that he puts up. There aren't many trades I would make for him in some type of a keeper league that I would accept. If you have him, you just ride it out and you see how far this goes. I was prepared to say last year, there's no way he could be better. There's no way he could be better than 26, 11, and 8. It just isn't possible. But then last season, he does it. He's a winner. He is an absolute stud in fantasy and reality. And if you have the number 1 pick, you run to the podium with your card, you throw it down, and then you just walk away. And you may not pick again till pick number 20 or pick number 25, whatever it might be, whatever the league you're in. But you know what? You sit back, you kick your feet up on the lazy boy, and you know that you're in the league no matter what if you've drafted Jokic.
Yeah, and another benefit of how this league is set up, there's so much depth. You do have high value guys in the top 6 overall draft picks. And these are guys that are giving you, from a fantasy point perspective, 55 to 60 points per game. Jokic being closer to that 60, that 58 range, right? But you get value on the turn. So even if you are pick 1 and then you don't pick again until pick 25, you're going to be able to find something in the multipliers that Jokic gets you from a double-double and triple-double perspective are fantastic. And then from an aggregate perspective, the number of games, this is what's so shocking. So these are his games played. 80 games, 73, 75, 80, 73, 72. So in 2021, he played 72 games. That was the league high. So no one played more than 72 games that year. So he might have been tied for it, but 72 games played. And then last season, 74 games. So from an aggregate, you're going to get that every single night. So if Denver plays 4 nights, right, I know on that week I win my league almost by having him by myself because I'm getting almost 240 fantasy points just from one player. So you have a lot of room for error, or a lot of room available if you have that first pick to not have to worry about it until the 25th pick. And I'll tell you another thing that makes it so crazy is Jamal Murray was out almost the entire season last year. Michael Porter Jr. hasn't been right in his entire duration of playing time with Denver. If those two people come back this season, even at 75% of what they expect, the things that Jokic, the numbers that he's putting up, he's doing that with Will Barton and Bones Highland. He's so interchangeable that it doesn't matter what the parts are. And the way he plays the game, he doesn't put himself in situations where he's going to get injured because he plays up on that free throw line. He has great vision. He understands that if that double team comes, he can pass out of it. That's what makes his passing so paramount. So he's not at injury risk because he's so damn smart that he doesn't put himself in situations or positions where he's going to get hurt. So Denver should be a team that fully healthy, which I don't know that we'll ever get that because I'm off the Michael Porter Jr. bandwagon for life. But if they lived up to 75% of their potential from their wings, Jokic is a good enough guy to get them to the Western Conference Finals by himself. So these numbers that he's putting up, you don't have to worry about whether or not Murray's hurt. It doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about whether or not Michael Porter Jr. comes back. It doesn't matter. He's got to. Me and Ken could go out there, and he's got to be fighting for MVP of the league. And that's why he's a no-brainer, the number 1 pick.
Well, I probably couldn't go out there right now based on my diet of IPAs and Benadryl. So that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. He is a difference maker. He's the true difference maker in fantasy. Parting thoughts. Hopefully we're making a difference in your fantasy leagues as well. So thoughts before we close today, James?
I think this has been a good series. I think people hopefully will kind of get some perspective as to how we look at our drafts. No two people draft their picks alike. I think having flexibility and having a league full of players that, whether they're homers, whether they're by definition kind of ignorant to some things, that makes it fun. And for people who aren't comfortable with fantasy, we really, really want to be advocates for playing regardless and having fun with it and enjoying it. I mean, if you're putting hundreds of dollars down and it's at risk, yeah, I mean, obviously you want to make sure that you're really locking in. But the great thing about fantasy basketball is it introduces you to a new way to watch the game and get acclimated with the players. It gives you something social to do with your friends. And that's why I play fantasy every single year, is for the enjoyment of it. So don't look at fantasy as something you have to do. Look at it as something that you look forward to doing. I mean, I can't tell you, and I know Ken can speak to this too, because I remember being in a league with him, but the countless nights at 12:01 when you're on the waiver wire and you're fighting for the playoffs, we look at the time, that seems like it's daunting, but when I look back at it, those are some of my favorite moments, is knowing that I'm racing to grab somebody on the waiver wire because I know, either Ken's going to grab it or Scott's going to grab it. So make fantasy enjoyable. Give yourself a reason to want to pull up that app and see how you guys are doing. Get yourself informed. It doesn't take much to look at stats and trends and things like that, and just enjoy your season. I hope everybody has a fantastic season. I look forward to talking to you throughout it. I'm excited to share the season with you, Ken, because I think it's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of laughs, and once we get in kind of a week-by-week format, that's when we really take off, and I'm excited for this upcoming season.
Yeah, you and I differ a little bit. I only play fantasy because I want to play against you and beat you and then make fun of you. So it's a little bit different, but it's all good. All good in the hood. So for James, I'll let you get back to your Frankenberry. I'm sure you're probably hungry for another bowl of sugary cereal here on a fine Saturday morning. So for James, I'm Ken. Have a great weekend, everybody.